We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. The situation in Afghanistan is, to say the least, precarious. No one really knows what the next few months will bring, but many suspect economic collapse, humanitarian atrocities. But that's on the Afghan side. What about America? How does the United States move forward? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by a prolific author of both articles and books, his latest tome being America's Expiration Date, The Fall of Empire, Superpowers, and the United States. He's also one of the leading lights of the modern conservative movement, Mr. Cal Thomas. Many thanks for being here, Cal. Once again, it's really a treat for both me and the listeners. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you very much, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you.
So I can't get started with the questions until we do a quick take. The day of the tragic deaths of 13 American soldiers in Kabul from the suicide bombings, Joe Biden took to the podium to speak. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, Mark, I thought it was one of the weakest responses I've ever heard and lacking in credibility. He said all the right things. He talked about avenging the deaths of the 13 Marines and the 90 Afghans. Let's not forget them too. But it just lacked credibility. You don't make those kinds of threats while you're surrendering and retreating and withdrawing. That doesn't strike fear into the heart of any of our enemies. And they are more than the Taliban, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, who have been encouraged and energized by this non-policy by this president. I went back and took another look at Franklin Roosevelt's tremendous speech to the Congress right after Pearl Harbor in 1941. Listen to what he said and contrast it with what Biden said. Here's Roosevelt. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. The Congress rose up as one in approval and applause. The contrast is overwhelming. Biden strikes no fear into the heart of anyone except the American people who fear that he is not up to the job.
I think your sentiments there are echoed by just about everybody who watched the briefing. So, Cal, in one of your recent syndicated columns that I picked up on Fox News about how Afghanistan's horror will spread and whether Team Biden has a grip on reality, it's a very worrisome but thought-provoking piece, and I recommend that everybody heads over there and reads it. But it did leave me with a lingering question. How does the world view America once the dust settles? And by this I mean both her allies and her enemies.
I think it views America now as a Hollywood marriage, right after the promise to never forsake you and to forsake all others. The United States is forsaking all others. The credibility of the United States is based on its ability to keep its promises. Our allies, not only in the UK, but around the world now, are looking at what has happened and rightfully wondering whether our promises are any longer valid. We talk in terms of economics of the full faith and credit of the United States in paying our bills. But what about the full faith and credit of the United States when it comes to our allies, when it comes to paying any price, bearing any burden, as John F. Kennedy said in his 1961 inaugural address? Apparently, we're not willing to pay any price anymore or bear any burden. We're willing to spend ourselves into oblivion, now approaching $30 trillion on domestic programs, but we're not willing, at least credibly, to stand up against enemies, both foreign and domestic. I think it has created an enormous credibility problem. The United States cannot be an island standing alone. We are part of a greater world conflagration. And if the United States cannot be trusted to keep its word, what does that say to the rest of the world and our friends, as well as our enemies?
Yeah, Nigel Farage had a very similar opinion to that when he said it would be very unlikely, in his opinion, that Britain would choose to back any military interventions that the United States gets involved in because he felt that Britain couldn't trust the military machinery with Joe Biden as its leader. Now, Cal, upon becoming president, Joe Biden, he famously said, and he said this several times since, America's back. And it was quite the boast. And I guess many of his opponents would argue that the real display of Western strength was under President Donald Trump. But with the U.S. let's call it flailing on the world stage, how does America get back again?
Well, I think we have to elect the right leaders. The past election, the most recent election, was more about people who didn't like Donald Trump's personality than it was about people who favored Joe Biden's personality or programs. Trump did it to himself. He committed political suicide by his constant demeaning of other people. Now, you might not like someone on the other side of your party or who have a different persuasion, but America has a certain Puritanism DNA left over from the past that even while we are criticizing someone else, we do not try or seek to demean their value. Reagan was best at this. He would say, our friends on the other side or our friends in the other party, and then he would go on to criticize a particular policy or position. That's the way to do it. You don't do it by talking about crying Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, or crazy Nancy, the Speaker of the House. People don't like that. And that's why a lot of Republicans who I know voted for Biden as a rebuke against Trump. So I think there's a lot of remorse now, a lot of regret about electing Biden, but we've got over a year until the next congressional election, and 2024 is a long way away. I'm not sure Biden's going to make it that far. I'm really not. I never thought that he had the physical or mental standing to last 4 years in office. And if that doesn't happen, we get Kamala Harris, who is a disaster waiting to happen.
A lot of people would agree with that sentiment, Cal. Now, when Joe Biden met with the G7, he was under pressure to extend the deadline for withdrawal, but he shut down the allies, which harkens back to what you were saying earlier. Why do you think that he found it so easy to dismiss those who have worked hand in hand as partners for so many decades, and yet can't muster an equally forceful attitude to a gang of marauding Taliban and their undercover allies in ISIS-K?
Well, I want to pick up on what you said about our allies, because he promised during the campaign and has promised since he was president that we're going to rebuild our relationships with our allies. And that this is something he alleged that Donald Trump didn't do, that he was just a one-man band. But this August 31st deadline, Mark, was simply arbitrary. It was made up in Biden's own mind. If you look at his record as former Secretary of Defense under Barack Obama, Bob Gates has said, Biden has been wrong on every foreign policy issue for 40 years. All he has known is a political life. He has never done anything other than politics. He has no military experience. He has no real world economic experience. He's drawn a paycheck only from the taxpayers of the United States. He's never really accomplished or done anything. He even admitted that those shovel-ready jobs under Biden, I guess, were not shovel-ready. He laughs about these things. Kamala Harris cackles all the time about things. They are unserious. They are not strong. And the Taliban and ISIS and Al-Qaeda look at this, and they've now taken over a country, and they're stronger than they were on 9/11. They have weapons that the American taxpayers paid for. They have helicopters now. They have the most sophisticated and up-to-date rifles and ammunition that we've left behind. They're coming after us again, and probably the UK as well, since the UK was our allies in this effort, along with other nations. But they're coming after us, and I think the next attack is going to be worse than the first one, and the blood will be on the hands of Joseph R. Biden.
Cal Thomas, thank you ever so much for joining us.
A pleasure, Mark.
I want to leave you with a few thoughts before we finish this week's show. There's an idea that we can change our lives through intent, literally as the clock ticks from one second to another. All it takes is the decision and the will to carry out that which you believe is right. When history looks back on this Afghanistan withdrawal and the actions taken, and of course the consequences of those actions, will students and historians say that, well, it was an inescapable conclusion? Or will they marvel at how the administration seemed to set on a singular course, and despite all advice, despite all evidence demonstrating that this was going seriously awry, as the second hand of the clock ticks from one marker to the next, the administration refused to change course? President Biden, as leader of the free world, appears to have locked America and her allies around the world on a singular path. And the sad truth is that we know where this leads. Now is a time of challenge. It's a time of adversity. We must all face it with bravery and fortitude, and most of all, with strength. As Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, valor consists in the power of self-recovery, so that a man cannot have his flank turned, cannot be out-generaled, but put him where you will, he stands. This can only be by his preferring truth to his past apprehension of truth, and his alert acceptance of it, from whatever quarter, the intrepid conviction that his laws, his relation to society, his Christianity, his world, at any time may be superseded and deceased. I want to thank all of our guests on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, right here on the Radio America Network. Dave Patterson, Jeff Charles, Scott Cosenza, and Cal Thomas. I appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. And I want to thank you, the listeners, for your support. This week's episode is dedicated to Pernell Bird, who sadly passed. He was a husband, a father, a musician, a writer of enormous talent, and a man who made the world a better place for all who knew him. He'll be sadly missed. Until next time, thank you for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.